Thank you so much for joining our second webinar on the Community One Stop for Growth. On behalf of the Baker-Polito administration and Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development Secretary Mike Neely, we are so appreciative of your continued interest and support of the One Stop. We are proud to work with you together to better partner with you on our strategic public investments across the Commonwealth. So this is our second webinar out of a three-part series to prepare you for the one-stop process. If you haven't watched the first webinar, we encourage you to do so. It's available on our website, www.mass.gov/onestop. We will also be hosting another webinar on Thursday at 12 p.m. So just a few process notes before we proceed. This webinar is being recorded and it's going to be available on our website. Just like last time, we're not going to be answering questions live, but we are compiling all of your questions that you submit through the Q&A function on WebEx and through the email. And we're going to aggregate all of the questions and develop answers and post them on our website. So here we have a roadmap of the session today. My name is Ashley Stolba, and I am Undersecretary of Community Development for the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. And I am so thrilled to be here and to partner with you on the One Stop. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Assistant Secretaries Juan Vega and Helena Frucio-Altman. So the flow of the webinar is shown here on the slide. First, Helena is going to briefly review what was discussed at our last webinar, including the programs that are covered, the development continuum, and the idea behind the one application per project. Then Juan is going to walk you through some specific examples that will hopefully provide some clarification. And then Helena is going to put it all together. We're going to go over some questions that we've already received at the last webinar and through our email. And then we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. So with that, Helena, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everyone. So as Ashley mentioned, we just wanted to revisit a couple of items from our previous webinar, as we think this is some key information as you're working to submit applications to the One Stop. So the first is we do have 10 programs that will be accepting applications through the One Stop process this fiscal year. Again, we are accepting applications for fiscal year 22. Which is coming right down the pike. So this includes MassWorks, Urban Agenda, 43D, which is a designation, as well as the Housing Choice Capital Grants, Mass Downtown Initiative, a couple of new programs created in the Economic Development Bill, including the Community Planning Grants and the Rural Development Fund, as well as some programs at Mass Development, Brownfields, and Site Readiness, and finally, another program created in the Economic Development Bill, underutilized properties. So all of these will be accepting our singular full application as they review funding for fiscal year 22. Next, we're going to just again remind you of the development continuum. It truly is the backbone of the One Stop. So we went into quite a lot of detail in the last webinar about each of these phases in the One Stop, but we did want to highlight a couple of items this time around based off of a couple of questions, and also just to remind you to recall the development continuum as we work through the examples of how you may submit your projects to the One Stop. So again, it's organized into two major categories: preparing for growth and then catalyzing specific projects. As you start with community capacity building, one of the questions we kept getting was, does a community capacity application have to lead to built infrastructure? And the answer is no. Community capacity building can be much broader than that. And some of the examples that we use are workforce development or other type of projects that may not result in an infrastructure project, but are key to building a foundation for economic development in our communities. Second, planning and zoning. This can focus on a singular address, but oftentimes this will likely focus on a district, or even in the case of a master plan, might focus on an entire community. So the geographic basis of your plan that you submit into, or applications you submit into planning and zoning, can have various geographic boundaries, and that is up to the community to propose. Then as we start to move further into the continuum, site prep, pre-development and permitting, buildings and infrastructure, that's when we really do need a specific address or parcel ID. And then as we continue to move down in the continuum, those are the specific projects, and each step along the way, we are furthering a project towards private development as we go. So remember, this development continuum will guide how you submit every single application into the one stop, and truly understanding your project as it relates to the continuum is a key to success in the one stop. Let's continue. Next slide, perfect. So as a reminder, this, you can actually go back to 5. As a reminder, the development continuum is sequential. So if you're tempted as you pull up a full application to check every single box for your project as you are submitting in a full application, we just are going to ask you to pause and start to really think about your project and what it would be ready for upon approval. If you were selected through our process, what would you really be able to achieve right away? Again, as a reminder, we will be approving these projects, and it will be in fall of 2021. So really dig deep, think about your project and what you are ready to achieve. I'm going to give you a quick example. Let's say you have a project that you want to clean up a site and build some sidewalks, but you're not really quite there on the private development yet. So you might be thinking, okay, I'm submitting an application in site preparation and infrastructure. Well, you really wouldn't be competitive yet in the infrastructure category, but it might be a perfect site preparation application. And so you might want to think about just submitting in a singular category. Again, if you submit your application to the expression of interest, we will be helping guide you to think about how to submit your projects in the most strategic way for a full application. Next, we really want you to focus on your project and what makes a project. As a reminder, a singular project would submit one full application, which is composed of both the core questions and additional questions based off of the part of the continuum you are submitting to. So as you are thinking about your project, if it's a particular district or a particular address, please be aware that those might be 2 separate applications, that you may need to submit one for a singular neighborhood, and then as you focus in on a singular building with a particular address or parcel ID, you should be thoughtful about all of the components of an application and how you should be dividing them out or putting them together. As a reminder, there's no cap. You could submit an unlimited number of applications to the one stop, and we'd like to see them all, but we'd really like you to be thoughtful about both of those elements, both where you fit into the continuum and what makes a project a particular place or geographic area, and then think about how you are submitting most strategically to the one stop. To that end, we want to give you a bunch of examples. And I am going to hand this over to Juan Vega to really go into detail and run you through so many examples of how your project may fit into the one stop. Juan?
Great. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Ashley. So at this point, as we introduced in the first webinar, the parts of the full application that you're going to need to complete will be dictated by where you fall on that development continuum. And we'll now go through a series of hypothetical projects of varying complexity to demonstrate how an applicant would be approaching their application. As Helena has outlined, by putting forth an expression of interest with your thinking of the projects and where you think you might fall in terms of categories, we will provide feedback to try to guide you in the direction that would make the application stronger or make the application more competitive. In this first example, the request is from a local community partnership that wants to carry out workforce education and job skills training to a particular target population. as well as provide support services such as childcare and transportation for the trainees. So in a case like this, the applicant would need to complete all of the core questions, and these are sections 1 through 4 in the full application. And as a reminder, for those of you that did submit an expression of interest prior to starting your full application, the first 2 sections will be automatically filled in based on what you submitted in the expression of interest. And so then at this point in section 3 is where you will then, which is the project summary section. And this is a key element of the application because this is where you will check the categories that you would like to submit your application in. And in this particular scenario, for this project, at question 3.1, you would select the capacity building category only. And for some of you, this may sound similar to an urban agenda grant or program that you would have submitted in the past for workforce development being done by a community coalition, et cetera. And so you would answer all the general questions about the community in the first 4 sections. And then in section 5 of the application, which is the capacity building section, this is where you would then outline your scope of work. You would be answering the questions about the coalition and then the target population and the expected outcomes. And so to recall, the graphic here from the first webinar is the overlay of the grant programs and which components of the continuum they will support. It's important to keep in mind that all applications submitted in this current round of the One Stop, as Helena mentioned, are for consideration of grant funding commitments that will be made for FY22 going forward. As you can see, we expect to be able to make awards in all of the categories using all of these various programs. The One Stop is built on this development continuum, which outlines the various phases and steps that are needed in order to plan any type of development. And so again, we're asking you to think about where you are in the life cycle of your project. Are you just starting to get something prepared and trying to position yourself for potential development? Or do you have a specific development in mind? You have a developer that you've partnered with and have a particular site that needs to be developed for housing or mixed use development, et cetera. We consider this to be, again, the preparation stage versus the implementation stage. In the next example, we want to now talk about, in this scenario, the project consists of 2 parts. Essentially, one is to acquire a site, and the other is to develop a plan to change the zoning to allow for multifamily housing at that site. And so this is a good example of a place-based focus. And again, you know, if you think about a project, we consider it from a place-based lens, where essentially it's at the same location. While it may have multiple components of your project, we're looking at this one main site. The One Stop allows you to outline the full picture again about what the community is trying to accomplish, and then to request support for the larger goal. At this point, I want to highlight an important fact. Applying for both categories doesn't necessarily guarantee an award in both categories. We will certainly, the review committee and each component will still be evaluated based on the criteria for each program and subject to the recommendations of those reviews. However, the program staff from both programs will be reviewing these together as well and making final decisions collaboratively. And so in this case, again, you would come in, submit all the core questions, and then you would select those 2 categories in 3.1, which will then open up the additional questions that you will need to answer in order to explain and describe your project around planning and zoning and in site preparation. Now we move on to another, I would like to say to the right side of the continuum, the implementation side. And with categories that are aimed at catalyzing specific projects. In this example, there's a downtown revitalization focus that is seeking to improve sidewalks to support potential housing development. The proponent does not yet have a developer identified, but has ownership and or site control, and is ready to prepare a pro forma to actually figure out the feasibility of the housing development. Or maybe there is a developer identified, But this is, again, where you want to really think about shovel readiness as far as any further infrastructure or construction. If the project has very little design completed, for example, and maybe it still needs to contact the MIPA office for potential review there. Maybe there's an access permit from DOT needed, and you haven't started that conversation. Or just basically there's more due diligence needed before you can proceed. These are all factors that may be deem a project not ready. And so we would definitely invite you, if you have a specific development, at this stage and in this category, we wouldn't be asking for all the details about the development yet. For example, how many, exact number of units, exact number of jobs, but we could consider making a grant to help you complete this part of your project and then prepare it for a future application in further down in the continuum. In the next slide, we're now starting to get a little bit more into, so here is the same project, actually. So here's the same project supporting these market rate units in the downtown, but there's specifically a developer identified. The pro forma has been completed, the financing path is clear. The design has been advanced and permits have been attained or are in process, and certainly with a date certain for completion. Now the focus turns to the actual public infrastructure that's going to be needed to actually activate or leverage that private development. The sidewalk widening, but it could also be streetscape or traffic lights, et cetera, that will directly support the private development. The application now again comes in, answers all the core questions, but in section 3 at 3.1 would be able to select infrastructure specifically and come in at that category. That'll then open that section of the application. And at this point, you'd be required to identify the developer, provide specific information, for example, on the number of housing units, the number of jobs, explain how far the design has gone, whether the municipality is contributing any match funding, and things like that. This is classic MassWorks, right? This is if you have a MassWorks project and that's what you intend to do going forward, you would come in, submit all your answer all the core questions, select infrastructure, and then answer the questions, most of which you will recognize from the past from MassWorks applications, very similar. And so this is, if that's your goal, you would come straight in this direction, land at infrastructure, answer those questions. I would also add at this point that this is the same path that would be pursued by small towns looking for road assistance, what was formerly known as STRAP. This is if you would come in, do the core questions, you would select infrastructure, and then you would answer the questions as you've always done in the MassWorks application around the actual project, your timeline, et cetera. And then you wouldn't obviously need to proceed to answer any questions about a private development, which is not required in the STRAP for a STRAP request. But I will stress that just like in all previous rounds of MassWorks, we will still be looking for the explanations and the arguments around the public safety concerns, the dangerous conditions that are being that you're trying to address. That will still be utilized in the evaluation and make the applications more competitive if they're able to effectively make the argument and a compelling argument around needing these road improvements in order to address dangerous situation and or public safety concerns. Okay, moving to our next example. Now we get into a much more multifaceted type project. This is similar to the example that we gave in webinar 1 that has multiple components. It's a downtown revitalization that requires some demolition, brownfields cleanup, etc. In this case, they want to create a business improvement district to attract investment, and they're also interested in studying the feasibility of bringing market rate housing to the site. And so again, you would come in, you would submit your responses to all of the core questions, section 1 through 4 of the application. In section 3, at this stage, given that the site has been identified specifically with an address and a particular site in your downtown, you would then be able to select three categories under 3.1 in planning and zoning, site preparation, and pre-development. Again, this will then open additional questions in each of those three categories. So you will still be required to then provide scope of work, provide timelines and budgets in each of the three sections. And we would be reviewing this kind of as a large, multifaceted project, but they would still be going through the evaluation of the individual programs that would consider making the investments. It's important to reiterate that submitting in the three categories is not a guarantee that you would be funded for all three categories. However, the review team will certainly look at the totality of this project, and to the extent that you're able to put forth in your narrative clearly the interrelationship and the need to carry out these multiple components to activate the site and to bring forth the change and the development and the growth that you're looking for, that will determine and help the reviewers understand, again, this relationship between all of these funding sources. The individual program staff will evaluate their sections, and then the group will come together and apply the criteria that we talked about in webinar 1 related to feasibility and impact, etc. So it's important again to understand that if you think of this as place-based, if you think of it as a particular site in your downtown or in a particular neighborhood, and instead of what would happen in the past is you would have to wait for each of programs' deadlines to try to apply the programs and try to piece this together. The One Stop gives you the opportunity to present the whole thing all at once. And it is still up to the writer of these applications, to all of you, to make your best arguments about, again, this interdependence and why it's important for us to consider the more complex project and consider making investments in all of these categories. Okay, moving on to our next site. So this is the same project, and this is an opportunity for us to describe these special considerations. As we've outlined before, of particular interest and policy priority of this administration is the creation of housing in all parts of the Commonwealth and all types of housing. And from the bond bill in particular, we've also increased the commitment and our support to rural and small towns by paying particular attention. And it's important to note, as the Secretary has shared in many of his presentations, we absolutely take into account the scale of projects. We understand that 30 units of housing in a small town in the Berkshires is a game changer, as opposed to 30 units of housing in a big city like Worcester or Boston. And we absolutely apply that lens in evaluating these applications and giving that consideration, understanding the impact, regardless of how small a project would be, the impact that it will have to that community and to that region. And so the project that we talked about, this downtown revitalization in a housing choice community that needs demolition, et cetera. Again, coming in, you'd be looking for these three categories in the continuum. So the application, when you submit your application and when you start your full application, there will already be a designation in there of whether you're a housing choice community or a rural in a small town. By virtue of having those designations, the review committee at all these programs will apply special consideration in addition to the regular funding sources that these programs would avail you to. There will also be consideration and review for potential capital grants coming from the Housing Choice Capital Program and or the Rural Development Fund. There's nothing the applicant needs to do at this stage. You've put forth, again, your job is to put forth the strongest argument you can about the importance of this project, the significance to your community, the significance to your community, to your region as well. And the review committee will then take this and review it at the program level, as well as in these particular additional programs that are available to these communities. Okay, moving on to our next example. We also want to alert you, in this same vein, the housing choice in rural and small towns, in addition to getting that second look, if you will, as part of the normal continuum, there are cases that we expect where a community may have a particular project that they can't figure out how to neatly fit into this continuum. And so an example of that is, again, a housing choice community is the applicant. They want to make repairs and improve accessibility to the entrance of their city or their town hall. The project is certainly important to the community, but there's no private development related to the project, and it wouldn't neatly fall into one of the categories in our continuum. And so this application will, in fact, provide this additional opportunity to select other in the categories in 3.1. But this option is only going to be available to communities that are designated as housing choice or of rural small towns. And that there will be additional questions that will then drop down related to the project, where you will have to describe a little more your timeline and budget, et cetera, for that particular project. Again, that may not fit into the continuum the way it is organized now, but we do want to, and there is the opportunity to consider making grants for these special projects out in this full application. And the way to do that, again, you submit the core questions, and at 3.1 you would select other, that the categories of other, either other housing choice or other rural small town, and that'll provide you then with the additional questions that'll be required. There is also a set of attachments, additional attachments that may be required as part of that process. Okay, moving on to the next. Now we'll get into the next two slides are going to get a little bit more complex. This is a case where the projects are multifaceted, but the projects are located in two different parts of the community. And so this is a situation, and this, emphasizing again that you should think of your projects as place-based. And so if you have two different corners of your community, that is very likely going to result in two separate applications. In this scenario, the municipality is interested in developing a downtown plan, as well as producing engineering documents for a publicly owned site on the outskirts of downtown. And so two different projects. One is engineering documents for one site, and then doing something in another part of town. The applicant fills out, in this situation, would need to fill out two separate applications. And in each scenario, you would answer the core questions, and one project, the first project would have you select in section 3, the planning and zoning, where you would request support for the developing of those engineering, developing of the downtown plan in that scenario. And then the other site in your community, you would again answer the questions in the core. The select pre-development and permitting, that's where you will be able to outline for us the need for the engineering documents and what that will entail and your time frame, et cetera. If you have, again, if you have different areas of the community or very clear differentiating factors, we request that you submit, we require that you submit two applications. It's probably also important to note at this point that we've been asked a lot about the limit of 5 projects coming in through the expression of interest. That does not relate to the number of full applications that you can submit. There is no limit. To the extent that you have the capacity to write multiple applications, you are invited to do so. Each application will be reviewed on its own merits and compete with all the other applications in that category. But there is no limit to the number of applications, of full applications, that you can submit for specific projects that are place-based. And now we move on to another scenario. In this case, the type of project is the same and the category is the same, but again, two completely different locations. In this scenario, the municipality is interested in working on a building on a main road that requires sprinkler installation, and then a building about a block away that needs accessibility upgrades, including a ramp. This application or this type of project, again, require two different applications. For the first project, you would select you would answer the core questions, select building, and answer the additional questions for the building that is looking for the sprinkler installation. You will be asked the timeline, the budget, etc. In a separate application, you would again answer all the core questions, select buildings again, but this time focus on that second site and the needs for the ramp, for ADA compliance, things like that. That's where you would want to spell all of that out. This is, and it's worth noting again that the number of applications is not limited. You can submit multiple under the same category. You could submit, if you have, for example, two MassWorks type projects, you want to pave a road, a main road that is being affected, or perhaps repair a culvert that is imminently in danger of collapse, but you also need to build a rotary because you have a major development that's opening up near your downtown. Those are two classic MassWorks applications. You would be able to submit those two. But if maybe you have the rotary need in one sense, and then in another part of town, you're just trying to do some zoning changes, those two different categories, two different applications would be required in those instances. Okay, I think that gets me to the end of, and I have passing it on. Yeah, Elena?
Thank you, Juan. That was very helpful to work through all of those various ways you can work the one-stop. So as another reminder from our previous webinar, we did just want to highlight eligibility by applicant type. And this matters for what Juan was describing, because if you're a certain applicant type that doesn't have a green check mark in a part of the continuum, the application will not populate that section in the full application for you to fill out. So for example, if you are signed in as a non-public, not-for-profit, infrastructure won't be an option for you to check that box in question 3.1, and that section will not be available to you. So just as a reminder, please consider how you are signed in and what applicant you are as you are preparing your full application. Again, municipal applicants have access to every single category in the development continuum, and other public entities have access to all but planning and zoning. So these two types of applicants have the most access within the one-stop. And the non-public entities still have options available to them, but we do, if you are one of those types of applicants, we do suggest that you consider partnering with your municipality to submit applications to the one-stop. Again, this is within the full application that this really matters. For the expression of interest, any applicant can submit an expression of interest on behalf of their own projects. That is not a municipality does it on behalf of any of the other applicants or the other way around. We do suggest that if multiple partners are working on a particular project, that you coordinate about who is going to submit that in the expression of interest. But again, that is a perfect chance for you to consider your project as you submit. But again, just eligibility of these various areas, we did just want to provide another reminder, especially as we're talking about submitting these in the full application. We just want to be clear that as you're signing in, your application will not have these options for you to fill in. We do not want you to be submitting applications where you are ineligible. So just please note that as you are working your way through the technology platform, please noting the availability of funds to you. Finally, on this slide, I just want to also note that all applications will be asked for a letter of support from the municipal CEO. This is not a requirement to receive funding, but will be noted as we review the application. If you do not have a letter of support from your municipal CEO, you will have the opportunity to describe why you do not have that letter included. Again, just to highlight that this will be part of every application. Let's move on. So just some high-level takeaways. First, the One Stop is meant to make your life easier, putting together these programs, accepting a singular full application on behalf of all of them. There's also the pathway to the programs that you know and love. As Juan highlighted in his slide, you wanted to submit to Urban Agenda, you submit to Community Capacity Building and you have a pretty direct line there, or MassWorks through infrastructure. Again, we are trying to make it clear, and those crosswalks that we're providing you, you do have a pathway to all of the funding that is available within the One Stop. Again, be strategic. Think about your project, both in terms of geographic scope and what makes your project, and also how ready your project is in each phase of the continuum, and how complex of an application you want to submit. Do you want to just submit in a singular category, or do you want to proceed with submitting a more complicated application that Juan highlighted earlier? Again, just please note that a project is focused on a particular geographic area, or just really being thoughtful about who you are thinking about your project in the One Stop. Finally, again, shout out to the expression of interest. We think it's a great opportunity for you to really understand your project and get our guidance before you take the time to fill out a full application. That's really the purpose of the expression of interest. The earlier you can get those in, they open on February 8th. The earlier you get those in, the sooner you get our guidance. We will be reviewing those weekly and getting you a response as soon as possible. So between February 8th and April 2nd is the final deadline you can submit. But again, the earlier the better, so then we can give you your guidance and you can proceed in making your plans to submit full applications that open in May. So on that point, just want to go one more slide. Again, the timeline with very specific dates. So as we mentioned previously, February 4th, so this Thursday, there's the final webinar focused on the actual platform in IGX. So that will be a technology-focused webinar. Then right now, you can see the expression of interest, but you can't submit that again until February 8th through April, it says April 12th, but it's actually April 2nd. And then this is your chance to get your guidance on your application. And then the full application, you can see it again now. So you can start drafting as many full applications as you're preparing to submit, but you can't actually hit that submit button until May 3rd through June 4th. Then we take those, we begin our collaborative review and evaluation. Just note we may be following up with you with some questions. If we have some follow-ups that we need to make better decisions on our end. So that is when you would be, over the summers, when you would be receiving those questions. And then we will be notifying you on the awards again mid-fall 2021, proceed with contracting, and then you're off and running, and you will have to submit annual reports as you normally would in any and all of these programs. Again, we just want to give you the pathway between now and the end of the calendar year. Again, we are preparing for fiscal year 22 funding and beyond. So just want to make sure that we're clear about that. So next we're going to go into some frequently asked questions that we received from the previous webinar and from other sources. I am going to hand that over to Ron to make sure that we have all of those questions, and then we're going to go from there. So again, thank you for tuning into this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Helena. So as Helena has mentioned, we are continuing to collect all of your questions, and thank you for those of you submitting through the Q&A panel in this webinar. We encourage you to continue submitting those questions. At the conclusion of our third webinar on Thursday, we will finalize a frequently asked questions document and expect to next week be able to post that document to our website that will have the aggregated questions that we have received. However, there were a handful of these questions that we felt we wanted to address today to start on that process. There were particular ones that we thought were important as you consider getting and starting your applications. The first one we've mentioned several times, it's, the applications. So someone asked if an applicant has already submitted grants this year to some of these programs that are now included in the one-stop, are we going to have to resubmit or submit these projects again? The one-stop is launching this year for funding commitments from fiscal year 22 going forward, as has been mentioned several times. And therefore, all of the programs that are now in the one-stop this past year did hold essentially their final independent rounds, including MassWorks and Site Readiness, et cetera. If you submitted applications and were awarded grants through any of those rounds, you would continue, that it will have no impact. This one-stop will have no impact on the implementation of any contracting or any grant commitments you have received to date. All of the applications received now in June by the June 4th deadline will be for consideration going forward, which may include multi-year contracts. It may include single-year contracts depending on the individual program. Again, we refer you back to the program guidelines for how any of the specific programs in this one-stop may handle contracting or other awarding protocols. The next question relates to so the timeline changing in terms of deadline for all these programs. In the one-stop, as we have mentioned, June 4th is the deadline for all full applications to be submitted. And so the question relates to our specific programs such as the regular July-August deadline for MassWorks. Are they all changing as well? So the answer there is yes. For all of the programs that are in this one-stop, they've now been reset, and the new timeline and the new deadline will be June 4th for any application that is seeking consideration for a grant from any of the programs that are included in this one-stop. They will have the same deadline for submission. I would note in a program, for most of these programs, we now have, you essentially have now 4 months between this week and the deadline week to work and develop the applications. The next question is, are funds required to be expended by the end of fiscal 22, or can they cross additional fiscal years? The answer to this question will vary by program, as I have already mentioned. We ask you to please refer to the guidelines for the specific programs within the categories of where you intend to apply. The links to these program guidelines are all available in the appendix of the notice for funding availability, the NOFA document, which is posted on the one-stop website, that will direct you to the guidelines of the programs. And it'll all be dictated by the specific programs. And so, for example, in MassWorks, we traditionally do multi-year contracts. And so, no, you will not be expected to expend all the funds by June of 2022. It'll all depend on the particular project. However, there are programs in this mix that may require expenditure within a shorter time frame. But they won't. We're not going to be operating any of these programs differently than you would have than they would have already been operated. And so a lot of this is being dictated by the specific guidelines of the program. As we mentioned in the first webinar, this one-stop does not erase or statutorily merge these programs. They still live on as independent standalone programs. What we are doing is coordinating the application intake for all of them and the collaboration around the review in order to be able to make more strategic investments across all of these programs. The next question was where does the expression of interest get submitted? The website again will point you to IGX, which is the online application portal. All of the expressions will be submitted through that system. The links are available on the website. And through this process, the application will be submitted to all of the partner agencies that will be reviewing in whatever category you are coming in. The expression in particular, we do encourage you to submit. You can start submitting immediately starting on February 8th and through April 2nd. You can submit at any time whenever you're ready. The review committee internally with the 3 agencies will be meeting regularly to review any applications or any expressions that have come in, and we'll take them in the order that they're coming in and provide the feedback accordingly. The next question is about the limit of 5. So the expression of interest is asking you to describe or pitch up to 5 projects that you're thinking about in order to get feedback. The limit there basically is because the team is going to read these and review these and provide you feedback for the projects that you submit. And so we limited it at 5 just in terms of ensuring that we're going to be able to respond to each of the expressions in a timely manner. We will need to review them, we'll need to discuss them together, and then be able to provide the feedback. The full application, on the other hand, you'll be able to submit those in that window between May 3rd and June 4th. And there will be no limit to the number of full applications once you've got all of the information. It'll be dictated by your capacity to be able to write applications, and as many viable projects that you have, you're certainly welcome to submit. Please note that they will each be reviewed independently against the criteria, and they will all be competing against each other. If you complete it, I wanted to reiterate that if you complete the expression of interest, when you go to submit your full application, the initial information from the first 2 sections will be auto-filled to save you some time. And you'll still have a chance to edit anything if you did want to edit anything further. Finally, the question is, will the proposed projects in the continuum require the support letter from the city or town in order to qualify for the funding? So adding on to what Helena was mentioning about the letters, we are requiring a letter from the municipal CEO with every full application, or an explanation about why perhaps the applicant was unable to get that letter. This is not a requirement as far as the funding is concerned. It's also not meant to be an approval function, the municipal CEO, unless your community has a requirement. For example, there are towns where the select board requires a vote of the select board in order to submit. You will still proceed with those rules and regulations that you would have at your municipal level. But the municipal CEO letter for us is one of the indications around readiness, around due diligence, to the extent that you are developing a project, whether it's housing or even workforce training, whatever the case may be, you're doing so in the context of a community. And we want to see the demonstration of that overall support, the demonstration of the collaborations happening at the local level, that buy-in, if you will. In some cases, we want to That's what we're trying to evaluate. And so we're requiring the municipal letter as one piece of information, in particular as an indication that the applicant has been in contact with folks in the community about what they're trying to accomplish and has been able to garner some initial support. So it's not an approval. We're not looking for the municipal CEO's approval of your project. We're just looking for a recognition that they understand the project, and that they are supportive of the project and will be helpful in carrying out the project. But again, it's not meant to be an approval, and it's not a requirement as far as being able to receive funding in this process. So that's the kind of the initial questions that we grabbed off of the questions that have been coming in. We will again continue aggregating all the questions that we get and be posting these on the website. Thank you. With that, I'll pass it to Ashley.
Thank you, Juan and Alina. Hopefully those examples and it makes it helpful. Of course, if you have further questions, please continue to submit them through the Q&A function and to our email address, onestop@mass.gov. So a few next steps. If you haven't already, please watch our first webinar, which is posted on our website, mass.gov/onestop. Please also participate in our third webinar, which is being held on Thursday at 12 p.m. This is going to focus on the training for when you actually access the actual platform. So it's probably most useful for the people, the members of your team who will actually be entering the information onto the website, but of course, we're all welcome to join. Please take a moment to read and familiarize yourself with the NOFA guidelines, also available on our website. And then, of course, please consider submitting one or more expressions of interest. They're not required, they're strongly recommended. They're each going to be reviewed by the appropriate state reviewers, and they will be able to provide guidance for when you actually submit the application. And then if we think your program is better, your project is better suited for a different program, they can help refer you. So we really are huge fans of the expressions of interest. We do suggest that you consider doing one, at least one. So thank you so much again for attending and participating in this process. We look forward to seeing you again on Thursday at 12 p.m. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you.